Mason, and today is July 7th, and I'm sitting here at 90 Rose Street in the kitchen of Rose Egiziaco. Rose, could you spell your name?
Yes, Fernandez is Fernandes as in Sam. Egiziaco is E-G George, I-Z-Zebra, I-A-C-O.
Okay, good, thank you.
And every single word.
Rose is going to be talking about her memories of experiences in Hastings during World War II. But before we start to talk about that, could you tell me something about yourself? For example, where and when you were born and when you came to Hastings.
I am a native of Hastings-on-Hudson. I was born on October 23rd, 1933, down on Ridge Street. In fact, the home where I was born was the first house that was totally destroyed when they had the gas explosion down on Ridge. I spent about the first 6 years of my life in the village of Hastings, and then we moved up to Uniontown. We rented at 78, and then my parents bought the house at number 90, and I still reside at number 90 Rose Street.
Thank you. Do you recall when you first knew about World War II starting, perhaps when Pearl Harbor was bombed?
Yes, I remember that day very clearly. We were coming home from my uncle's house in New Jersey, and we were driving up Henry Hudson Parkway or West Side Highway, the main road right there along the Hudson River, when people were saying something about Pearl Harbor was bombed, Pearl Harbor was bombed. I didn't fully realize what it meant, but I heard my mom and dad talking, and it meant war. So you could sense the tension in the air.
So during the war, you were between the ages of 8 and 12 approximately.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's about it, right.
Yes.
41 to 45, yeah.
During the war, did you notice any changes in your family life?
No really great drastic changes. I think my parents just try to show us a normal life as possible. The only changes I picked up is probably the rationing of certain foods, not being able to get certain things, and shopping, my mom shopping with the coupons, always needing coupons or little stamps to buy different things. Different things meaning food, and there were shoes. My father had it for the gasoline of the car. That's about it. I don't think anything else was a drastic change.
Did you miss anything that you would normally eat? You have any recollections of that?
I don't remember. I know sugar and coffee was at a premium, but then, I wasn't really into drinking coffee, but I know but my mom and her friends, it was always, someone was always running out of coffee or sugar. But my mom always was able to budget her staples, and she always managed to have some on hand.
As far as neighbors, do you recall any of your neighbors that went into the service from Hastings?
My neighbors here on Rose Street, yes, there was George Booth, who lived next door to us. There were the Slavin boys up the street. They were a large family. All the boys in the family went into the military. In fact, in our historian newsletter, Let me just flip over. Isn't this terrible? I should have. All right, the Hastings Historian, Volume 24, Number 2, Spring of 1994, has an item on the Slavin family. And they were one of the first families that we met when we moved into Uniontown. It was like my second home, the Slavin house. I refer to Mrs. Slavin as Grandma Slavin. And the Ramsey boy next door to the Slavins, they may have had two sons, but I know one boy was killed in action. The Groats had people in the military, and I remember other military personnel, but they were from the village, from the Portuguese community. We had two of our boys from the Portuguese-American community that were killed in action, and it was very upsetting for me because I remember when they said goodbye to my parents, and then I remember also when they got the news that they were killed in action. It was very sad.
Now, do you recall whether these young men enlisted in the service or whether they were drafted?
I cannot, I don't remember the status of whether they enlisted or were drafted, but there were so many that enlisted, but I didn't know in which manner they were called into service.
What was the general feeling? Do you have any idea of the general feeling that the boys had about going into the service? I mean, did anyone ever talk to you about it, or is this something that you knew about?
I would say that the feeling I picked up were they were all eager to serve. I didn't pick up any resentment. At least I didn't. It wasn't visible to me. But then, as I say, I was, between the ages of 9 and 12.
Right.
So.
And how old were most of these boys who went in to serve?
Well, some were, I think, some may have been just out of high school. Some, there were some that left school to go into the service. Then when the war was over, they came to the high school and PG'd, what we called PG'd.
What is that?
I think it means postgraduate. And they finished their education after the military, they came back to high school so they could receive their diploma.
Do you know, were there any special courses in the high school that prepared them for the service?
I wouldn't have any knowledge of that because I wasn't in high school at the time.
During the war, your dad worked at the Anaconda plant. Is
Right.
that correct?
That's right.
Can you talk about what his role was?
Well, Anaconda is a wire and cable plant, and the factory received different government contracts for different types of cables and different projects. And my father received 2 Navy E's just for his work ethic, and the way I understand it is that Dad was the only person that was permitted to work on this special project who was not an American citizen, because anyone that the Navy had worked for them had to be an American citizen, and Dad hadn't received his citizen papers yet, but he was highly recommended by the management because of his work ethic and meticulous work. So I guess the FBI, I'm sure, did a check on him, but they accepted him. And my father was thrilled, especially when he received the 2 Navy E awards. And we were very proud of him.
And what did your mother do during the war? Did she work?
No, she was, as they refer to it today, she was a domestic engineer. took care of the children. Yeah.
And how did she manage?
Well, God bless her, even to this day, at 83, she manages very well. And even though we had the ration coupons, I never had the feeling that we were short on food or that we couldn't have what we needed, because it seemed like whatever I needed was there. She managed very well. That she sometimes gave her extra ration stamps to my aunt, who had a few more children than she did. But she did very well.
Did your parents participate in civil defense?
My father was an air raid warden. I know he took up, for a certified first aid course, the air raid warden. I think in Anaconda he was like a fireman down there. I think they had some things going on during the war, so he participated wherever he was able to.
And what did that entail, his being an air raid warden?
Well, when the whistle went off and everyone had to darken their homes, my dad had to go out he had a white helmet, and it had the insignia of the civil defense. He had a whistle, he had an armband, and he had to carry this thing, which to me, now that I look back at it, is really so stupid. It was a tank that he had to carry with water, and it had a small hose, and you had to pump it. It looked like one of those, like a dynamite, those things they use for dynamite with the lever where you push it down. And you had to keep pumping this up and down to get water out of the hose. And, God forbid if a bomb dropped, what was he going to do with that tiny little hose? I don't think you could put out a match or a firecracker with it. And he had to carry that heavy thing loaded with water in case there was fire or something. But, God, that couldn't put out anything. We just had fun with it, showering ourselves, the kids, on the street. We used to fill it up when my father was at work, and we'd be squirting each other with it.
What happened? How did you know when an air raid came?
The siren would go off. It was a certain siren. It would go off, and what we had to do...
Excuse me, was that from Uniontown Firehouse?
I don't know if it was from... I don't recall if it was from Uniontown or just the main siren from the village. Or if it was the whistle from Anaconda. I just can't remember. And everything had to be dark. My dad had to run out in a hurry because he had his own area to watch, and if someone had their lights on, you had to blow the whistle, and they had to put out the lights, and if they didn't put out the lights, you had to go knock on the door and make them put out their lights. And that was about the extent of this, and we just had to sit quiet in the house until, of course we could talk and stuff, but, we just had to stay put. We couldn't go walk out in the streets or anything like that. We had to stay put until the all clear came on.
So you would sit there with your mom
My
and
sister.
your sisters?
Well, just one sister at the time.
One sister.
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel when the air raid siren went off and your dad went running out of the house?
Well, I was scared because I always felt if airplanes came, would he get killed? Would something happen to my father? It was scary. And especially like if we happened to have an air raid and you did, and maybe just by chance there was an airplane overhead, you didn't know, was it, enemy or not. So it was scary because I didn't want nothing to happen to my father. And I was afraid when he used to go out. Very scary for a young child.
What happened when you were in school and the air raid siren went off? What did you have to do there?
We had to leave our classrooms. I guess it was similar to a fire drill. Everything was very orderly. And I remember my class was where the health office is now on the main level, well, I guess what is the middle school now, in front of the health office. We sat, with our backs up to the wall and our knees up and our heads down on our knees, and we had to stay very quiet, which we did, or else.
Mm-hmm.
Can't do that today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Did anything else take place in school? Any activities that you participated in that had to do with the war effort?
I remember Red Cross project where we had to knit 6 by 6 squares, and all the squares were put together into either lap robes or afghans, and supposedly they were going to our soldiers in hospitals and so forth, but I don't know if it did, because I heard all sorts of stories, so I don't know if it's fact or fiction, that what we did and thought was going overseas for the boys were being used for enemy prisoners, but I guess they needed blankets too. So I didn't relish the thought.
So the students did this? Was it just girl students who did the knitting?
Yeah, I don't recall seeing a boy knit. I think if he did, I don't know. I think he'd have to be put up with a lot of ridicule. Someone saw him with knitting needles. I don't recall boys doing that. I don't know what the boys did. I don't recall.
What about any other activities in school? Were there any other clubs or activities that you recall?
I think we had bundles for Britain. I think we sent stuff over to Hastings, England, packages. And
Do you remember anything about the arrangement with Hastings, England?
No, I'm a little fuzzy, but I know we sent different packages overseas.
Do you remember what was in the packages? Was it food or clothing? Or?
No, I really can't, but I think some of it was food, candy. I don't recall clothing, but there could have been clothing, but I'm a little fuzzy on that. Maybe one of the teachers that are still around would remember.
Yeah.
Marge Jason might remember. She was teaching then.
She's on the list, so
yeah.
we will be able to ask her.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that your dad, you mentioned at another time that your dad had a victory garden. Can you tell me about that?
Oh, sure, right, the victory garden. The victory garden was the area between Farragut, and I believe it's Brantford, Farragut Avenue, Brantford on one side, Ravensdale Road on the other, and then that road, I don't know, the road behind, that runs horizontally to Farragut, that whole big square. It used to be a big field where they used to hold the annual circus, and they converted it to Victory Garden, so everyone had their own patch. And you grew whatever you wanted to grow. My dad grew mostly vegetables, so we could use, vegetables, and my mother probably canned some, because I know she used to do a lot of canning. And he made a design like with all the cabbage heads. He planted the seeds in the shape of a V, so when the cabbages grew, you could see the shape of a V. And somewhere I have a picture, but I know not where. Isn't that awful? My sister and I always helped. Right. My sister and I always would go over with Dad. We'd water the plants, weed the garden, and so forth. There were a lot of gardens there.
About how large a plot of land was that?
Oh gosh, it was pretty large as I remember it. Let me see, maybe 15 feet square, something like that.
And other families had gardens right next to you?
Mm-hmm. Everybody had their patch, and there were no fences or strings because everything was on the honor system, and you never had to worry if someone was going to come take your tomatoes or produce, because you would go from one day to the next and nothing was touched. It was, you didn't have to worry about that.
Do you remember any of the families who gardened near you?
No, I don't. Don't remember at all.
Was everybody that you knew in favor of the war, or were there people that you heard about who were not in sympathy with the war?
Well, as far as I knew, and what I could pick up, when my parents had friends come over for coffee or whatever, or different discussions I heard with the adults, because of course the kids really wouldn't pick that up because things like that we weren't tuned into.
Right.
But I felt it was all positive. However, there were some incidents in Hastings where I know one family in particular where the man of the house was thought to be a Nazi sympathizer, and the FBI had come to my father's house to ask questions about the man because he worked with my father, so they were asking him questions, but they had asked if the girls would leave the room, so we had to leave the house, so we couldn't hear any of the conversation. So I don't know what questions went on and so forth. And apparently this man had a Nazi flag hanging in his house, and I think someone may have seen it and reported it, or maybe they just picked up on the vibes. And then I was told about two other families, which was shocking to me. And I said, oh, no, it couldn't be. But it may have been, but I don't know.
What were you told?
I don't know if they were investigated. Well, it was similar to this man that worked with my father, also Nazi sympathizers. They were all, they had come to the United States from Germany, though they lived in this country for a number of years. They were still true to their country, or I should say probably true to their Führer. And I don't know if the other two were investigated or not, but...
Did they have children, any of these families?
Yes.
Do you recall thinking anything about the children, or having any particular feelings about knowing that their parents were under suspicion for being Nazi sympathizers?
No, it didn't bother me, because with this one family in particular, I just thought if the father was involved, I thought it was terrible, it was disgusting, because, you saw on TV, a particular person had a TV, so God, I'm going to give out his name, and I don't want to. You saw different things in the media, I should say, and if you connected the two together, I just thought it was terrible. I couldn't see how anybody... I feel that's when I lost respect for the man, just didn't care. I just couldn't stand him after that. But I didn't take anything out on the children because, we were in school together, we would play together and so forth. So, no, it didn't run off. How do they say, the sins of the father shouldn't go on to the children.
Right.
So.
Did anything happen to these people that you know of? I mean, were they restricted in any way, or
No.
did they lose their jobs?
No,
No.
didn't lose job. Guess they investigated, and maybe, depending on what information they picked up from the interview, maybe they felt it wasn't necessary. Maybe the man had the flag in the house because it represented his native country and not have anything to do with, Nazism, but it was a Nazi flag, so I know Germany has its own flag, but I don't know. He may have been gung-ho for it.
How did your family follow the news of the war?
Radio. We had no TV then. Radio. FDR, I think newscaster, I think at the time may have been Gabriel Heater. Just newscasts, it was constantly on. My father always would, as soon as he'd come home from work, turn on the radio and listen to what was newspapers. Newspapers and radio, I guess, primary source.
Do you remember hearing about whether we were doing well in battle or not doing well?
Well, there were times when you knew things weren't going well with Japan, and yeah, I sensed it. You know, I was able to read the paper and you could see the headlines. And it was sad, you know, when things went bad, it was sad because we had friends that were overseas.
Do you recall hearing about any of our boys who were killed during the war?
Yeah. I still get choky about it because they came to my parents' house to say goodbye and they never came back. And I could still see it as clear as day. As clear as day, I could see them coming into our house and saying goodbye to my mom and dad because they were leaving for war and they didn't come home. And it's been so long and I still cry over it because they were so young. They were friends of the family.
What were their names?
Josie Isidro. We were very close to Josie. And then I knew Josie pretty well because we used to live where he lived. And then Armin Carvalho, he lived up on Warburton, but he was with the Portuguese community, and we had our Portuguese-American club, so, you know, the families were all together, the kids were all together, and we knew each other growing up because we were like our little, if you want to call it, little colony or community, so.
Can you spell their names?
Yeah, Josie, well, his name is Josie, and I believe it was Joseph, but everyone always called him Josie, so I'm assuming his name was Joseph. And Isidro was, I believe, Izidro, and the other one is Armand, Armand, or he may have gone by Armando Carvalho, Carvalho. Of course, as you know, we had a neighbor too. The Ramsey boy was killed also. And of course, there were others, but you know, I didn't know them. These are the ones that I knew personally.
When you were in school, besides the Red Cross, the squares that you knit, were there any other things that you did, like collecting materials for the war effort or war bonds? Can you speak about those things?
Yes, we were into early recyclables. Of course, it wasn't called recyclables at the time. Scrap, I guess. I think it was called.
Scrap,
it may have been called
metal.
scrap. We saved aluminum foil.
Where would you get the aluminum foil?
Well, there was aluminum foil on milk bottles, aluminum foil on gum wrappers. I remember those two. I'm sure there must have been other sources of aluminum, but I remember the gum. And we used to just keep putting it into a ball, and all the kids would see who could get the biggest ball of aluminum. And then I seem to remember down by the train station they had a big scrap drive where we bought all our stuff, like the aluminum, different metals, I think rubber, and I think paper. I'm a little fuzzy on just exactly what they collected, but I remember my mother saving like different, like rubber bands and things like that, the aluminum, metal. I think paper too, I'm not sure, I'm a little fuzzy on that.
What about war bonds?
They also had bond drives. I'm a little hazy on that. I think also down by the train station.
Did you as children?
Hmm?
Did you as children participate in buying stamps?
Like we had books that had little squares in it, so you were able to buy stamps. I don't remember how much each stamp sold for, but when we filled the book up, it was, I believe, a $25 bond. Now, I don't know if I did it just at home through the bank or if we did that at school. Could have been in school, but here again I'm a little fuzzy. Someone else will have to fill the gap. lots of gaps. I guess my age is catching up with me. My memory's failing.
Was there a special place that your parents shopped for food and things in Hastings?
Yeah, there was down on Lower Washington Avenue, there was the butcher, Mr. Kazima, and I'm not sure how to spell the name, probably something like Kezema maybe. And you could buy whatever you wanted in the store, and what he did to the people, if you couldn't pay, he would just write the amount in the book. And here again, this is honest system. You had this little, what looked like an assignment pad, and you went in, you bought something. If it happened to be like $5.30, he would put $5.30 in the book. And then you took your groceries and you'd go off, and then the next time you come in, you buy something else, so just write it in the book. And then you paid, as you were able to pay. Other people had little books like that.
Did that change during the war? Was it more difficult to get meat?
I know meat was supposedly, meat, I remember my mother saying meat was hard to come by. But apparently there was a black market in Hastings, so I think a lot of people...
Do you want to say where that was?
I'd rather not. I don't think I'd like to be sitting in front of a judge. No, but I think the person... I'd rather not mention the name, but I think the person knows who it is, and the old-timers will know who it is, and I just hesitate mentioning the family name since some of the members of the family are still in town. And, of course, they were very young at the time, so can't blame them for what their family did, because they were within my age group. So can't point a finger at them, but I'd rather not mention the family name.
Do you recall any differences in clothing or money or anything like that during the war?
Well, I think the one item that sticks out in my mind was that nylons were very hard to come by, and the older girls that always used the stockings would buy this liquid makeup, and they would apply it on their legs. It's something like what you have now. It was a cream like a foundation type base, and it would make their legs look brown, so supposedly they looked like they had nylons on, but if you could just visualize it and think about it, I mean, God, stupid. It just, well, I don't know, I guess some of their legs were too white, so they made them brown. And that's about the only thing I can remember that was different with clothing.
What would they wear during the winter? What did you wear during the winter?
Socks, bobby socks. White socks, usually. Or, I don't know, I don't even know if they had knee highs then. Just socks. Or then we had our leggings, what we call leggings, that we used.
What were they made of?
Oh, probably cotton, or I don't know if they were wool, because wool, I think, was a little hard to come by also. But, we had the leggings like to school, and of course you would take them out. It was just to keep our legs warm.
Yes.
And out to play and stuff like that. It's about the only thing I remember. And the money, the only thing with the money is when copper, of course, was in demand. So the pennies was of a silver metal. I don't know what type of metal it was, but it was a silvery color. I don't think I have any around. I used to, but I don't think I have any around. I think that's about it.
During the war, did the village memorialize any of the soldiers who had died? Do you have any recollection of that?
I don't have any recollection of that. I'm sure things were done during Memorial Day, but I can't remember. I think we had parades, because I remember seeing some of our men in uniform, especially Nelson Iafrate, when he marched in the parade. He was so handsome in his marine blues that I will always remember. Yeah.
Now, were there Girl Scout and Boy Scout troops here in Hastings?
Yes, they were.
Did they march in the parade?
Oh, usually, yes.
Were you a Girl Scout?
No, I wasn't. Usually scouting was for those in a different financial bracket. They were an equal opportunity employer at the time.
Did you try to get in?
No, because I knew it would be useless. Because I know my cousin from the village got in only because she palled around with someone that was from the so-called quote-unquote hill, and her mother was able to get her into scouting. They probably didn't care to have us there because we couldn't afford it. Maybe pay the dues or do something, but I know it was difficult for the village kids to get in.
Do you recall when the war was over, how it was celebrated in Hastings?
I really don't remember, but my mom had told me that when the war was over, my dad came home from work, and he picked up my mom and my sister and I, and we went, and my other sister, well, she was newborn. She was born in 43, so she was about 2 years old at the time then. And she said everyone went down into the village, and they went down to Dunn's. That's on Spring Street, which is now the Food for Thought store. But I guess different crowds went to different pubs in the village, and that's where everybody congregated. And I have a friend of mine that was in the Fife and Drum Corps, and she told me that she remembers the Fife and Drum got together, and they were playing music all over town and going in and out of the different pubs. And when some of them saw that their parents were in the pubs, they were quite disturbed by it, because they felt, gee, my parents don't do that. But it was it was like a village-wide celebration. It wasn't that, individual families were just going in to drink. They were there to celebrate the victory.
Do you remember seeing any welcome home signs for the boys or anything like that?
I don't recall, no.
Or people putting American flags on their homes?
Well, I know my father always had flag out, and also, speaking of flags, there were also flags with stars on it, so families that had sons or daughters in the war would get these flags. They were red with a white middle and blue stars on the white panel. Like if you had one son, you had one star. You have two sons, you have two stars. And so whatever number sons you had, you would have the number stars on these flags, and it would hang on the front door. And then those who lost their sons would use the same type of a flag, but the sun would, the star would be in gold if they lost someone in the war.
Is there some permanent recognition that the village made for the boys who served in the Army, and the ones who died? Was there some kind of memorial plaques?
Well, there used to be an honor roll, I believe, in front of the VFW. They also, the issue of the historian I mentioned, I believe has a picture of that in it. and it lists all the men that served, but it was only up to a certain year, so the list isn't really complete. I think they went back to November of 43, so there were a number of names added to this honor roll, and in fact, the Stefanko family, Stefanko, was a five-star family, but you see that only 4 of the boys are listed, so there's one name missing. It's the same up at the school honor roll where they have some missing names, and I've been trying to get that honor roll updated because I feel it's very important. These boys should not be forgotten. The students from Hastings, they should not only get the World War II updated, but the other wars since then. They should get their due recognition.
Were there any women from Hastings that you knew about who were in the war?
I didn't know of any woman that went into the military. Though again, on the honor roll list, there are 2 names mentioned, Foley's, and I believe their family still lives in Hastings. So maybe someone could follow up on that.
Tell me about the Memorial Day service at the VFW. Are these boys still recognized on that day at least?
Those that are recognized are the ones that didn't come back when they have a roll call. And they will call off the names, and someone in the background will answer absent, sir. For example, if they mention Josie Isidro, someone would say absent, sir. Armando Carvalho, absent, sir. And it's, again, it's a very sad thing for me to hear. And also like the young man in Beirut that was killed, and it's just too sad to me. I get very emotional over these things.
Yes.
But this is what they do.
We've spoken about a lot of different topics about World War II. Is there anything else that you would like to add, perhaps, that we haven't spoken about?
At this time, I can't think of anything.
If you think of something, and we can always add to this tape. So I would really like to thank you, and I appreciate you being the narrator.
Okay, my pleasure. Every little bit helps the history of Hastings. I guess the weights here.
A couple of added memories from Rose Egiziaco.
Upon reviewing the honor roll at the Hastings Historian spring of '94, I came across 2 names that jarred my memory. One was George W. Booth, and he lived at 80 Rose Street. And I remember the day that he came home as clear as day. He was in the Army, and of course, he looked handsome. I mean, which serviceman didn't look handsome? But our dining room window faced his dining room window. It was just a very narrow alleyway that separated the 2 houses. So my sister and I, of course, we were, about 12 years old, and there he was sitting at the telephone table and making calls. We assumed he was calling his girlfriend and stuff, and we just looked at him because, and we were waving and giving him smiles. He was smiling and waving to us. And while we were peeking out the windows, because my sister and I thought that he looked exactly like the actor John Hodiak. So, I mean, you know, that was so thrilling for 2 girls at 12, 12 and 13. And then there was Nick DeLillo, D-E-L-I-L-L-O, as it's shown on the honor roll. He was a foster child of Mr. and Mrs. William Daly that lived at 74 Rose Street. And Nick was in the Navy, and here again, very handsome Italian young man, beautiful jet black hair. and I was learning how to ride a two-wheel bike at the time, and Nick just pitched in and helped me to learn how to ride a bike. He held up the bike with the, he helped me holding onto the back of the bike, and I kept telling him, I'm going to fall, and he says, no, you're not, don't worry about a thing, I'm holding you up. I said, okay, and then he let me go, and I still thought he was behind me, and then I was talking to him, and he wasn't there, and I panicked, but that's how I learned to ride a bike, was by a nice young Navy man by the name of Nick. Oh, and games, right. Abby and I were mentioning something about games, and then I recalled my sister and I and two of our playmates at the time were Frank D'Souza, that's D-E-S-O-U-Z-A. He was a former patrolman in Hastings-on-Hudson, of course, when he got older. And then Walter D'Souza, D-E-S-O-U-Z-A. They were both brothers. Walter had the D'Souza Electric Company, and he also became one of the fire chiefs in Hastings. But the four of us always used to play Army, and one side would be the enemy and the other side would be the Allies, and this is how I guess the war affected our playing. But we also did other games like badminton, stickball, and other normal games that most kids would play, but I always got a kick out of us playing Army, because as we got older and we saw what each of us had become, I said, gee, I remember the days when we used to play Army with one another. So I just thought I'd add that on.